My name is Thomas Grant. I'm 72 years old. I've got rough hands, a bad knee, and a house I built with my own two hands 40 years ago on the edge of a lake in Michigan. I'm not a complicated man. Never was. I spent my life cutting wood, raising children, loving my wife, and minding my own business. And when Dorothy passed 3 years ago, I figured the rest of my years would be quiet, peaceful. The kind of quiet that settles over a man when he's done most of what he was put on earth to do. I wasn't unhappy. I was just alone. So when my daughter Emily called and said she and her husband Derek wanted to come stay with me for a while, to help out, she said, to make sure I was okay, I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt wanted. I should have listened to the other feeling, the one sitting right underneath it, the one that whispered, "Something isn't right." But I didn't, and that's how it all began. Within 3 weeks of Emily and Derek moving in, I started forgetting things, small things at first, where I'd put my coffee mug, whether I'd locked the back door. Then bigger things, conversations I couldn't recall, mornings that felt like they'd been erased. I thought it was grief. I thought it was age. I thought I was finally losing my mind. But that was just the beginning of my plan. Because I wasn't losing my mind at all. I was being drugged. And the moment I figured that out, the moment everything snapped back into terrible, crystal-clear focus, I stopped being a grieving old man and became something I hadn't been in years. I became a carpenter again, measuring twice, cutting once, building something slow and strong and impossible to tear down. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the betrayal, but the beginning of my life, because you need to understand what was at stake. I grew up the son of a sawmill worker in rural Michigan. We didn't have much, but we had land and we had pride. My father used to say, "Thomas, a man's home is the one thing nobody can take from you if you build it right." I took that to heart. When I was 24, I married Dorothy Simmons at the small Lutheran church 2 towns over. She wore yellow, not white, yellow. She said white was for women who pretended to be something they weren't, and Dorothy was never that. She was real in the way that very few people ever are. Stubborn, funny, warm, and absolutely unwilling to put up with nonsense of any kind. We had 2 children. Emily came first, and then our son Paul, who lives out in Portland now with his wife and works in environmental law. Paul and I have always been close, the quiet kind of close, where you don't need many words. Emily was different. Even as a girl, she wanted more than what we had, more than the lake, more than the town, more than a father who smelled like sawdust. I never held that against her. I understood it, even when it hurt. She moved to Chicago in her mid-20s, married Derek Holloway at a hotel wedding I wore a rented suit to. Derek was the kind of man who shook your hand while looking over your shoulder to see who else was in the room, but he made Emily happy, or at least he made her feel like she was going somewhere, and for a while that seemed like enough. Over the years, the visits got shorter, the phone calls less frequent. Dorothy used to make excuses for Emily. I did too. We told ourselves she was busy, that she'd come around. Dorothy passed in the spring, 2 years ago, March. A stroke. Fast, the doctors said, and I'm grateful for that, even though every day since has felt like learning to walk with one leg. I kept the house. Of course I kept the house. I built it. I'd laid every board, driven every nail, mixed the concrete for the foundation myself. 40 years of Christmases and summer dinners in Dorothy's garden out back. The house sat on 2 acres that had appreciated considerably over the decades, and the land behind it, 12 acres of timber and lakefront, had been in my family since my grandfather's time. By any reasonable estimate, the property was worth close to $3 million. I never thought about that. I thought about the way the light came through the kitchen window in the morning. I thought about the dent in the door frame where Paul had measured himself every birthday until he was 17. I thought about Dorothy's garden. It was 6 months after her passing that Emily called. "Daddy," she said. She only called me Daddy when she wanted something. "Derek and I have been talking, and we're worried about you being out there alone. What if something happened? What if you fell? We'd never forgive ourselves." I remember standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the frozen lake, and feeling that warmth bloom in my chest. "You'd really come out here?" I said. "Of course we would," she said. "You're our family." I said yes before she finished the sentence. They arrived on a Tuesday. Emily hugged me long and tight at the door, and I stood there with my eyes closed and let myself believe that everything was going to be all right. Derek carried in their bags, shook my hand, and said, "Thomas, we're going to take good care of you." I smiled. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. The first 2 weeks were lovely. Emily cooked dinner most nights. Derek fixed the gutter on the north side of the house that I'd been meaning to get to. We sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the lake go from gold to gray to black. I slept better than I had in months. And then slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, things began to change. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Because the worst betrayals never announce themselves. They come in quietly, dressed like kindness, and by the time you see them clearly, they're already inside.
It started with the pills. About 3 weeks in, Emily came to me after dinner with a small glass of water and 2 white tablets in her palm. "The doctor at the senior clinic in town recommended these," she said. "Just a supplement, vitamin D and something for your circulation. At your age, Daddy, you need to stay on top of these things." I didn't question it. Why would I? She was my daughter. She was a nurse, had her license and everything. And I did feel like my circulation had been poor that winter. So I took them. Within a week, something was wrong. I'd walk into a room and forget why I'd come. I'd start a sentence and lose it halfway through. One morning, I stood in the backyard for 20 minutes, staring at Dorothy's rose bushes, and I genuinely could not remember what month it was. "You seem confused today, Dad," Emily would say, her voice soft with concern. "Are you sleeping all right?" Derek started setting up cameras, small ones, mounted in the corners of the living room, the hallway, the kitchen. "Home security," he said. "At your age, living out here, it's just smart. If something happened to you, we'd want to have footage." I nodded. I think I nodded. Those weeks are blurry, even now. Then, one afternoon in February, I was looking for a book in the study, Dorothy's study, where she used to grade her students' papers back when she taught school, and I knocked over a stack of folders Derek had left on the desk, papers scattered across the floor. I bent down to gather them, not really reading, just stacking. And then a phrase caught my eye. "Petition for guardianship in the matter of Thomas Earl Grant." I stood up slowly. I looked at the document in my hand. Then I read it, every word. It was a legal petition to have me declared mentally incompetent. There were notes from a doctor I'd never heard of, references to cognitive assessments I had no memory of taking, a description of my deteriorating condition that made me sound like a man who could no longer care for himself. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Emily Holloway, Derek Holloway. I stood in that study for a long time. The lake outside was white and still. The house was quiet. And then, like a window being thrown open on a cold morning, everything rushed in at once. The pills, the cameras, the isolation, Emily redirecting calls from my friends, telling them I was resting and would call back later. Derek asking to help manage my online banking because I had been having trouble with technology. I built this house, I thought. I raised this woman. I loved her, and she was going to take everything. My hands were shaking, my eyes were burning. But underneath the grief, underneath the disbelief, something else was rising, something quiet and old and absolutely certain. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them. I went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I took Emily's pill, walked to the downstairs bathroom, and flushed it down the toilet. Then I picked up my phone and I called my grandson. Michael Grant, 31 years old, Paul's boy, smart as a whip and twice as sharp. He'd been with the FBI field office in Detroit for 3 years. When he picked up and I heard his voice, something in me finally broke open. Just a little, just enough. "Michael," I said, quietly, moving to the far corner of the garage where the cameras didn't reach. "I need your help, and I need you to not say a word to your father yet, not until I tell you it's time." Silence on the line. Then, "Grandpa, talk to me." And I did. The next morning, I was at the breakfast table when Emily came down. I let my hands tremble a little when I poured my coffee. I stared out the window with that unfocused look she'd grown accustomed to. "How are you feeling today, Daddy?" she asked. "Hmm?" I turned slowly. "Oh, fine. A little foggy." She smiled, sympathetic, patient. And I thought, you have no idea who you're sitting across from. That was the beginning of what I think of now as my last great project. A carpenter's job. Careful, precise, no wasted motion. Michael had instructed me to document everything. So I did. I had an old digital recorder that I'd used years ago for dictating measurements on job sites. I slipped it into my shirt pocket each morning. Every conversation in that house went on to that recorder. Every phone call Emily took in the kitchen. Every discussion she and Derek had over the wine they drank most evenings. I also began, very carefully, to collect the pills Emily gave me each night. I stopped flushing them and started sealing them in a small plastic bag I kept hidden in a coffee tin in the workshop, a place neither of them ever went. Michael arranged, through a contact at the state crime lab, to have those pills analyzed without a chain of custody that could be traced back to us. Not yet. The results came back 10 days later. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine, commonly used for anxiety, but in the doses I'd been receiving, more than enough to cause memory fog, confusion, and the appearance of cognitive decline in a healthy adult. I sat with that information for 1 full day before I let myself feel anything about it. My own daughter had been sedating me. Not because she was afraid for my health, but because a confused, compliant, legally incompetent father was worth $3 million. Meanwhile, Michael was pulling threads. What he found was worse than either of us had imagined. Derek Holloway had done this before. Not with family, or not only with family. He had a history going back almost a decade, 3 other elderly individuals in 2 other states, all isolated from their support networks, all reported to show sudden cognitive decline, all eventually transferred to care facilities, their assets liquidated and funneled through a series of shell companies. 2 of those cases had been closed without charges. 1 victim had died in the care facility. Derek wasn't just a greedy son-in-law. He was part of an organized fraud network targeting elderly homeowners. And Emily, my Emily, was his partner. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Because there are moments in life when the person who was supposed to protect you turns out to be the one you needed protection from. And surviving that, really surviving it, takes something harder than anger. It takes patience and clarity and the willingness to let justice do what vengeance never can. I kept performing, kept trembling at breakfast, kept staring blankly at the television, kept taking Emily's pill and smiling gratefully and saying, "Thank you, sweetheart." And I kept that recorder running. One night, this was a Thursday, I remember, because I'd been watching the weather and a storm was moving in off the lake. I heard them in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to sleep. I sat at the top of the stairs in the dark, and I listened. Derek's voice, low and relaxed. "The facility's confirmed for next Friday. We just need the signed petition filed by Monday." Emily, "And the accounts?" Derek, "I've already moved the liquid assets.
The house and the land we sell after guardianship clears. Conservative estimate 3.2, maybe 3.5 if we get a bidding situation on the lakefront. A pause. Then Emily laughed. It was a small sound, quiet, almost light. That laugh was the thing that undid me. Not the numbers, not the plan, that laugh. Because I recognized it. I'd heard it her whole life, at birthday parties, on Christmas morning, when she caught a fish from the dock for the first time at age 8 and held it up with both hands and screamed with delight. And now she was using it to celebrate stealing everything her father had worked for. I went back to bed. I lay there in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, and I thought about Dorothy, about what she would have said. I knew exactly what she would have said. Finish it, Thomas. Finish it right.
By the following Wednesday, Michael had everything he needed. The pill analysis, the financial records showing the movement of my liquid assets into an account I'd never authorized, the audio recordings, clear enough for a jury to hear every word, the legal documents which bore forged notation from a physician who turned out to be connected to Derek's network in 3 previous cases, and the testimonies of 2 surviving victims from Derek's prior operations who'd been located by Michael's team and were willing to speak. The FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force had been briefed. A federal warrant had been obtained. Michael called me Wednesday night, just after 11, while Emily and Derek slept down the hall. "Friday morning," he said, "7 a.m. Can you hold until then?" "I've been holding for 40 years," I said. 2 more days won't kill me." He laughed softly. "Are you okay, Grandpa? Really?" I looked around the bedroom, at the wallpaper Dorothy and I had hung together in the summer of 1987, at the cedar chest at the foot of the bed that had been her grandmother's, at the window that looked out over the dark lake, snow just beginning to fall in the light from the porch. "I'm in my house," I said. "I'm fine." Friday morning arrived gray and cold, a February sky sitting low over the water. I was at the kitchen table at 6:30 with my coffee when Emily came downstairs. "Big day," Derek said, coming in behind her. He poured himself coffee. He was dressed well, pressed shirt, like he was going somewhere important. I suppose he was in his mind. "We've got a few things to take care of this morning, Thomas. You might hear some people at the door. Nothing to worry about." "All right," I said, staring at my coffee, letting my hand shake just a little on the mug. Derek clapped me on the shoulder. "It's all going to be fine. You'll be comfortable, taken care of." "Thank you, Derek," I said. I looked up at him, and just for a second, just long enough for him to see it and wonder about it and have no time to do anything at all, I let my expression clear, completely. Sharp and still and steady as I'd been at 25, measuring a roofline in the Michigan sun. His face changed. And then came the knock at the door. Not the gentle knock of a nursing facility transport, not the uncertain knock of a social worker. A federal officer's knock, 3 times, hard. Derek stood up. The front door opened. There were 4 of them. 2 clothes agents and 2 in jackets with the letters across the back. Michael was the 5th, standing just off the porch steps in a long, dark coat, looking at me through the door with steady eyes that looked in that moment remarkably like his grandfather's. "FBI," the lead agent said. "Derek Holloway, Emily Holloway, please keep your hands visible. You are under arrest." Derek spun toward me. His face was a color I'd never seen on a person before. "You what? You can't, you don't even—" "I know exactly what I did. I've known since February 5th, and I've been recording since February 6th. Emily said nothing. That was the part that stayed with me longest in the months that followed. She said nothing. She didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years, and her face went very still and very young, and she looked for just a moment like the 8-year-old girl who'd held up that fish with both hands. Then the agents led her out the door. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Because love doesn't insulate us from betrayal. It just makes the betrayal cut deeper.
And it makes the justice, when it finally comes, feel like something greater than personal victory. It feels like the truth finally winning after a very long time.
The case went federal. Michael had been right. Derek's operation was larger than just us. The FBI's Elder Fraud Unit identified 11 other victims across 4 states. 7 of them were still alive. 4 of those were still in care facilities under fraudulent guardianship arrangements. And because of the evidence gathered in my case, the legal process to restore their autonomy and their assets began within weeks. I didn't know those people, but I thought about them. I thought about each of them lying in those facility beds, maybe believing that their families had made this choice for them, maybe no longer trusting their own minds. And I felt a weight in my chest that didn't leave for a long time. In March, I went to testify at a preliminary hearing. I put on my best suit, the navy one I'd worn to Paul's wedding, which still fit if I stood up straight, and I drove to the federal courthouse in Detroit with Michael beside me. The courtroom was quiet when I took the stand. Wood-paneled, high ceilings, the kind of room built to feel serious, and it did. The prosecutor asked me to describe in my own words what had happened. I did. I didn't rush it. I kept my voice level and clear. Derek Holloway sat at the defense table in a gray suit, looking at the table in front of him. He did not look at me once. Emily sat a few rows behind him, separate counsel, her hands folded in her lap. She looked thin. She looked tired. She looked once directly at me. I met her eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I just looked at her steadily, the way I'd looked at her when she was small and had done something wrong and knew it. Not with contempt, just with honesty. She was the first to look away. The verdict came down in September. Derek Holloway, guilty on 6 federal counts, including elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and medication tampering. Sentenced to 14 years. Emily Holloway, guilty on 3 counts, sentenced to 6 years, with parole eligibility at 3. I sat in the courtroom when the sentences were read, and I felt the weight in my chest shift. Not lift entirely, not disappear, but shift, the way a heavy piece of timber shifts when you finally found the right place to set it down. It was done. That day, justice was finally served. Afterward, Paul came and stood beside me on the courthouse steps. He'd driven in from Portland the night before. He didn't say much, he never did, but he put his arm around my shoulder and we stood there in the September sun for a while, not talking, just breathing. "She made her choices," he said finally. "She did," I said. "What do you feel?" I thought about that honestly before I answered. "I feel like I can go home," I said. Paul nodded. And then I said, "Except I'm not sure the house is still home." He looked at me. "I think it's time I built something new."
I sold the property in October, not because I had to, not because I couldn't bear it, but because I understood, finally, what my father had meant when he said a home is the one thing nobody can take from you if you build it right. He hadn't meant the lumber. He hadn't meant the land. He meant the life inside it, the love you fill it with. And that, the 40 years with Dorothy, the summers with my children when they were young, the smell of sawdust and lake air and pine, that was mine, that will always be mine. No court document, no guardianship petition, no act of betrayal could take what was already inside me. I moved to a small town outside of Ann Arbor, 40 minutes from Michael and his wife Sarah and their daughter Lucy. I rented a house at first, a plain little thing with a sagging porch and old windows, and then, because I am who I am, I started fixing it. New windows, rebuilt porch, re-insulated the attic. The landlord was so pleased he let me stay rent-free for 6 months. I joined a volunteer organization through the county, a group that does free home repairs for low-income seniors. There are a lot of old houses in this county, a lot of old people living in them who can't afford what the houses need. I go out 3, sometimes 4 days a week with a truck bed full of tools, and I fix what I can. It keeps my hands busy, it keeps my mind clear. One Saturday afternoon in late November, I was repairing a front porch for a woman named Ruth, 81 years old, former school teacher, sharp as a tack and stubborn as winter. And Lucy was with me, the way she often is on weekends. She was 7 then, with her father's serious eyes and her mother's tendency to ask questions about everything. She handed me nails while I worked, didn't say much, and then out of nowhere, in the way children do, she asked, "Grandpa, why do you fix broken houses?" I stopped what I was doing, set down my hammer. I looked out at the November yard, the bare trees, the sky the color of old pewter, a cardinal sitting very red and very still on a fence post. And I thought about all of it. The house on the lake, Dorothy, Emily as a little girl, the pills, the recorder in my shirt pocket, Michael's voice on the phone, the courtroom in September, the weight in my chest and the moment it shifted. I looked at Lucy. "Because broken doesn't mean finished," I said. "A broken thing, if it's got good bones, you can build it back up, better than it was sometimes." She thought about that with her serious face. "Like people?" she said. I smiled. "Yeah," I said, "like people." I picked up my hammer and went back to work. For the first time, I felt free. I still think about Emily. I won't pretend I don't. I think about the girl she was and the choices she made and the long road between those two things. I've written her a letter, not to excuse what she did and not to tell her I've forgotten it, but to tell her that I'm still her father, that when her time is served and she has to build her own life back up from wherever she finds herself standing, I'll be here. Whether she takes that or not is her choice. She's always made her own choices. But I've made mine too. I chose to build, not destroy. I chose truth over silence. I chose, in the end, to let justice carry what vengeance never could, and to walk away from that courthouse with my hands empty and my conscience clear. My name is Thomas Grant. I'm a carpenter. I'm a grandfather. I'm a man who was betrayed by someone he loved and who chose, slowly, carefully, deliberately, to build something better out of the wreckage. Real family is the people who actually want you there. What would you have done?